The German soldiers were already inside Sommocolonia when Lieutenant John Fox gave the order that should have killed him. From an upper-floor observation post, he had been directing American artillery toward the roads and buildings below. The infantry around him had been forced back. Enemy troops were filling the streets, and the distance between the shells and Fox's position kept shrinking. His fire direction center warned that the next correction would bring the barrage onto the house where he stood. Fox understood. He asked for it anyway. When the guns hesitated, he made the meaning unmistakable. There were more of them than there were of him. He was not guessing what artillery would do. He had watched every previous correction land and knew precisely why the men at the guns were reluctant. On December 26, 1944, a forward observer in a Tuscan village chose to place his own coordinates inside the target area. John Robert Fox was born in Cincinnati in 1915, attended Wilberforce University, and joined the Reserve Officers Training Corps. He graduated with a commission as a second lieutenant and entered a military that still separated black soldiers from white soldiers by policy. Fox served in the 92nd Infantry Division, known as the Buffalo Division, a formation composed largely of black enlisted men. Their training, assignments, promotions, and public reputation were judged through a racial double standard before many of them reached combat. Success could be treated as an exception, while failure was used as a verdict on an entire group. Fox's path to Sommocolonia therefore ran through two battles: the declared war against Germany and the institutional restrictions carried into the army that sent him there. By late 1944, the 92nd Division was fighting in the Italian campaign. The front had moved north through mountains, rivers, narrow valleys, and fortified towns. Winter changed the character of every operation. Roads became difficult, cloud and fog limited observation, and high ground controlled movement far beyond the size of the units occupying it. A few houses on a slope could reveal columns moving along a valley road and also conceal an attacking force until it was close. Sommocolonia sat above the Serchio Valley in Tuscany. The village stone buildings and steep approaches made it a useful observation point and a difficult place to defend. American positions there helped watch routes through the valley and toward the mountains. Fox served as a forward observer, the officer who translated what he could see into coordinates and corrections for artillery crews firing from miles away. His position existed because the guns needed eyes beyond their horizon. A forward observer did not command the guns by simply pointing toward the enemy. He had to identify the target, estimate or calculate its location, transmit a request, watch where the first rounds landed, and correct the fire. Each adjustment moved high explosive closer to the intended position. The crew at the battery converted his call into firing data, set fuses and charges, aimed the pieces, and sent rounds toward coordinates they could not see. The system depended on comm communication under conditions designed to destroy comm. Smoke could hide landmarks. Buildings could channel sound and make direction uncertain. Telephone lines could be cut, radios could fail, and the observer's own position could be overrun while the gun crews remained far behind the front. A mistake in direction or range could move the burst toward friendly soldiers. Fox's weapon was distance. His danger was that the enemy could close that distance faster than the artillery process could respond. On Christmas night, German forces prepared a counterattack in the Serchio Valley. The operation included German troops and Italian fascist units striking positions held by the 92nd Division and attached forces. In Sommocolonia, Fox was serving with a small American detachment alongside Italian partisans. The village was not a large fortress. Its defenders occupied buildings and observation points in terrain where an attacker could use darkness, local routes, and winter weather. The stone construction divided the fight into rooms, alleys, and blind corners. At about 4 in the morning on December 26, the attack began. The men inside heard weapons, received reports, and discovered that a much larger force was entering their defensive area. The first problem was how to understand an attack arriving in darkness from more than one direction. Fox began calling for artillery. The first mission struck the approaches to Sommocolonia and routes German troops were using to advance. From his position, he could see enough of the battle to keep adjusting the guns even as the situation changed around him. Each effective barrage delayed movement, forced soldiers into cover, and broke the rhythm of the attack. But artillery could not seal every street, and an observer could not see through every wall. German troops continued to push into the village. The American infantry position deteriorated, and the defenders were forced to withdraw. A forward observer normally moved with the unit he supported. Fox stayed. His decision preserved the one view and communication link that could keep the guns working against the enemy inside Sommocolonia. It also separated him from the men, most likely to protect or evacuate him. Remaining behind did not mean Fox was alone from the first moment. The village contained American defenders, Italian partisans, civilians, and attacking troops moving through a compact maze of stone walls and narrow streets. Information arrived in fragments. A friendly position that existed minutes earlier could disappear. A building thought secure could suddenly contain enemy soldiers. Fox continued sending corrections while the line around him collapsed. He had to distinguish movement in brief openings and avoid placing fire on men still trying to withdraw. His observation post became less a protected place than the last fixed point from which the artillery could be aimed. The farther friendly troops withdrew, the more useful his fire became to their escape. At the same time, every successful correction told the enemy that someone nearby was still watching them. Muzzle flashes belonged to distant batteries, but the accuracy of the bursts pointed back toward an observer in the village. The German advance reached the village center. Fox saw enemy soldiers in the streets and near his position. He called the artillery closer. The fire direction center processed the corrections, and shells moved inward towards Sommocolonia. Artillery has a geometry that does not care about intention. A shell aimed near the observer can kill the observer as easily as the men he is trying to stop. Safety depends on distance, accurate coordinates, functioning ammunition, and predictable dispersion. Burst fragments travel beyond the point marked on a map, and a round landing short can turn a calculated risk into immediate disaster. Fox deliberately surrendered that safety one correction at a time. When he asked for fire closer to the observation post, the gun crews knew the risk. When he corrected it closer again, the distinction between his location and the target began to vanish. The map still showed separate coordinates, but the battlefield no longer offered separate spaces. The request eventually reached the point where the artilleryman questioned it. Fox confirmed that he wanted the rounds on his own position. Accounts preserve his explanation in direct, practical terms. Fire it, because there were more enemy soldiers around him than friendly men. The statement was not a desire to die. It was a calculation about what his remaining position could accomplish. He could see the concentration forming around the post, while the battery could see only numbers and hear his voice. If the Germans captured the observation point without resistance, they would continue through the village and pursue the withdrawing defenders. If the artillery struck the area, it could break up the concentration, delay the advance, and buy time for others to reorganize. Fox was exchanging the one life he could no longer extract for minutes and distance that many other men still needed. The decision was personal, but its intended effect was collective. If carefully sourced stories like John Fox's deserve a place in public memory, subscribe to Frontline Brief, leave a like, and tell us in the comments what you think command responsibility means when every available choice carries a human cost. At Sommocolonia, the answer was transmitted over a military communication line. Fox did not have to imagine the consequence of his order. He had spent the morning watching shells land and correcting them. He knew their blast, fragmentation, and effect on stone buildings. The battery crews also understood that an observer sometimes requested dangerously close fire because friendly troops were about to be overrun. Their hesitation was not disobedience. It was the final safety check in a system built to prevent an accidental strike. Fox's confirmation removed the possibility that the coordinates were a mistake. His final correction applied professional knowledge to the room and streets around him. The artillery came down on the observation area. High explosives struck the village while German troops occupied the streets and buildings surrounding Fox. The barrage disrupted the attack and killed many of the soldiers near his position. It shattered the concentration that had made the final fire request tactically valuable. Fox was killed as well. His Medal of Honor citation later reported that when American forces retook the position, they found his body among approximately 100 German dead. That number comes from the official citation and should be understood as a battlefield finding, not a complete reconstruction of every casualty in the village. Bodies near the post did not reveal every unit, moment, or cause of death. The essential fact is secure. Fox deliberately called artillery onto his location, and the resulting fire delayed the enemy advance. The physical evidence matched the purpose of his final transmission. The delay mattered because the action at Sommocolonia was part of a larger defensive crisis. German and Italian forces achieved surprise and pushed through portions of the American line in the Serchio Valley. Units had to withdraw, reform, account for missing men, establish communications, and prevent a local breakthrough from becoming a wider collapse. Fox could not reverse the entire offensive from one observation post. What he could do was make the village costly and slow. Artillery forced attackers to stop, disperse, seek cover, and reorganize before moving again. It also disrupted the confidence created by surprise. An attacking column that expected to exploit a breakthrough now had to determine whether more observed fire would follow. Even a brief interruption gave friendly soldiers more space to escape contact and establish another position. In a withdrawal, minutes could determine whether a unit crossed an exposed road before enemy fire reached it, whether wounded men were carried, and whether a new line received warning. Heroism here was measured not by territory held forever, but by time transferred from one group of men to another. Sommocolonia itself suffered. Civilians lived inside the battlefield, and the village was damaged during the fighting. Remembering Fox's action responsibly requires holding two truths together. His artillery mission was a deliberate military response to enemy troops surrounding his post, and artillery in a populated stone village carried destructive consequences beyond a clean target diagram. The story does not need to erase civilians or turn bombardment into spectacle. Fox's decision is powerful precisely because the conditions were terrible and the choices narrow. He acted where friendly withdrawal, enemy occupation, civilian danger, and his own survival could no longer be separated. American forces later returned to the village and recovered Fox's body. The physical scene supported what the radio traffic and surviving soldiers had described. He had remained at the observation post after the defensive position gave way, and the artillery had struck a concentration of enemy troops around him. In many Medal of Honor stories, the decisive action is visible to an entire company. Fox's was mediated through coordinates, transmissions, gun crews, and the aftermath. Men miles away loaded and fired the rounds. They could hear his corrections but could not see the room he occupied. They had to trust the observer's awareness of his own danger just as he trusted their accuracy and response. That reciprocal trust is easy to miss in the shortened version of the story. Fox did not personally create the barrage. A network of trained soldiers acted on his call. Yet only he possessed the view that made the final judgment possible. The battlefield system that allowed one observer to control distant guns also meant his final act had to be understood through evidence assembled after the fire stopped. Courage traveled through a communications chain before anyone could describe its full cost. Recognition did not come quickly. Fox was first awarded the Distinguished Service Cross in 1982, nearly 38 years after his death. That award formally acknowledged extraordinary heroism, but it still stopped below the nation's highest military decoration. The delay reflected more than the ordinary slowness of military paperwork. For decades, no Black American who served in the Second World War received the Medal of Honor, despite the service and sacrifice of Black troops across multiple theaters. The absence was too complete to explain as chance. Questions about it eventually led the Army to review records and determine whether racial bias had affected award decisions. The review examined cases in which valor had been recognized below the highest level or not fully recognized at the time. It had to compare incomplete wartime files, while also confronting the standards by which different soldiers had originally been judged. In 1997, President Bill Clinton presented Medals of Honor for 7 Black Second World War veterans. John Fox was among 6 whose awards were made posthumously. Vernon Baker was the only recipient still living. Fox's widow, Arlene, accepted the medal on his behalf. More than 52 years had passed since the artillery struck Sommocolonia. Children had grown old, units had disappeared, and the country's public memory of the war had hardened before the ceremony occurred. The award corrected part of the official record, but it could not return the years in which Fox's name remained outside the nation's most visible account of wartime valor. A delayed medal creates 2 histories at once: the action on the battlefield and the later struggle to make institutions describe that action fairly. The second history does not diminish the first. It explains why the first was not honored equally. Fox's story belongs to the 92nd Division, but it should not be used to simplify the division's entire war into one heroic episode. The Buffalo Soldiers fought under uneven leadership, discriminatory policies, difficult terrain, and public scrutiny that often treated individual failures as racial proof while discounting individual excellence. Some units performed poorly in particular actions, others fought effectively. Replacements, training, command decisions, supply, terrain, and battlefield conditions all mattered. White formations were usually allowed those explanations. Black formations were often denied them. That unequal interpretation influenced reputations long after individual battles ended. Fox's action does not erase the division's complexities or convert every command decision into a success. It destroys one false assumption: that the men restricted by segregation lacked the discipline, judgment, or courage required for the highest level of combat responsibility. Fox exercised that responsibility when no superior officer could make the decision for him, then waited decades for the official record to meet the standard he had already met. His role as an artillery observer also challenges the familiar image of courage as a charge toward the enemy. Fox's decisive act was to stay in a room and continue communicating. He read terrain, watched movement, converted observation into numbers, and brought distant batteries onto a target he could see. He had to speak clearly enough for men under different conditions to act without seeing what he saw. The final order was the end point of professional skill, not a sudden rejection of it. Because he understood artillery, he knew exactly what asking for fire on his position meant. Because he understood the collapsing defense, he knew what might happen if he stopped. The sacrifice was extraordinary, but the method was the work he had been trained to perform. His heroism did not replace competence. It depended on competence remaining intact under unbearable pressure. Today, memorials and official histories preserve John Fox's name in Cincinnati, within the Army, and in the village where he fought. Those honors matter most when they return attention to the decision rather than replace it with a monument. A plaque can state the result in a sentence, but the decision developed through hours of observation, correction, withdrawal, and narrowing distance. At 4 in the morning, there was no future ceremony. There was a winter attack, a small defensive force, broken communications and positions, and an observer watching enemy troops occupy the ground around him. Fox could leave with the withdrawal and lose the view, remain without firing and be captured, or use the guns while he still controlled them. None was safe, and none preserved everything. He chose the option that gave the withdrawing soldiers the best chance. The lasting sound of Sommocolonia is a correction moving closer. Each transmission reduces the distance between the target and the man directing the fire. The gun crews question the final coordinates because they understand what the map is telling them. Fox confirms the order because he understands what the streets are telling him. There are more enemy soldiers around the post than there is time left to escape. The shells arrive, the advance slows, and the observer disappears inside the mission he called. The men withdrawing do not need to see the observation room to receive what Fox has given them. They receive it as a pause in enemy pressure, a road left open, and another chance to establish a line. 52 years later, The United States placed the Medal of Honor beside his name, but the meaning of John Fox's action had been complete since December 26, 1944. He used his final position to create a path for other men to live.